I went down from the counter to finish the finale. After waiting for a while, I realized it hadn't come and started helping. I had never seen the package up close before, so I didn't realize how big it was. I could only get half of it. Luckily, before I got tired, a powerful vibration came out. It was dripping down my face and onto the floor. "Oh, you were here?" You caught the end of the story, but there's more. If you're wondering how this all happened, let me start from the beginning. I never thought my Friday nights would look like this, alone in my small apartment, nursing a glass of wine, and scrolling through dating apps that seemed more like a chore than an adventure. At 35, life hadn't exactly turned out how I'd imagined. Most of my friends were married, raising kids, planning vacations, and here I was, ordering pizza because cooking for one felt like a depressing reminder of what I didn't have. It wasn't that I hated my life. I had a good job, a cozy apartment, and plenty of freedom. But sometimes, that freedom felt more like emptiness. I'd catch myself staring out of the window, wondering if I'd made the right choices or if I'd just let time slip away without realizing it. That night, the rain was relentless, hammering against the windows and sheets. It matched my mood, a little gray, a little heavy. When the pizza arrived, I almost didn't hear the knock over the sound of the storm. But when I opened the door, there he was, a soaking wet delivery guy, barely more than a kid. He couldn't have been older than his early 20s, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and clothes dripping water all over the hallway floor. I couldn't help but feel bad for him. The poor guy looked miserable, shivering in the cold rain that had soaked through his jacket. Something about the way he stood there, clutching the pizza box like it was his last defense against the storm, tugged at me. He reminded me of a stray dog, one you couldn't just ignore. Without thinking too much about it, I found myself inviting him inside. It wasn't like me to do something like that. I wasn't the type to let strangers into my apartment. But in that moment, he didn't seem like a stranger. He seemed like someone who needed a break, and maybe I needed one too. That's how it started, just a small act of kindness on a rainy night. But looking back, it was the first spark in a chain of events I never saw coming. After letting him in, I handed him a towel and directed him toward the bathroom to dry off. He looked so grateful, like someone who hadn't been shown a shred of kindness in a while, and that softened me even more. I remembered a set of old clothes my nephew had left behind on his last visit, a hoodie and a pair of sweatpants, and went to grab them. They weren't perfect, but they'd be better than his soaked uniform. As I walked back toward the bathroom, I found the door slightly ajar, steam starting to drift into the hallway. I hesitated, my hand frozen midair as I moved to knock. Then I heard him rustling inside, peeling off his wet clothes, and for reasons I couldn't quite understand, I lingered. It wasn't intentional at first, but my curiosity got the better of me. The reflection from the mirror gave me a glimpse, not enough to see everything, but enough to make my pulse quicken. I felt ridiculous, like a schoolgirl spying on her crush. But it wasn't just about what I saw, it was the feeling that I'd crossed an invisible line. For years, I'd buried the part of me that longed for connection, for intimacy. I told myself I didn't need it, that I was fine on my own. But standing there, I felt the weight of everything I'd denied myself come rushing back. When he stepped out a moment later, dressed in the too large hoodie and sweatpants, I couldn't meet his eyes. My cheeks burned, and I busied myself with tidying up the living room to hide my unease. But he must have sensed something, because there was a shift in the air between us, a quiet tension that hadn't been there before. I offered him a spot on the couch, and as we sat there, the storm still raging outside, the silence stretched long and heavy. I could feel him watching me, and it made my skin tingle in a way I hadn't felt in years. Something unspoken passed between us, and I wondered if he felt it too. This wasn't just about shelter from the rain anymore. Something had changed, and we were both keenly aware of it. What scared me most was how much I didn't want to stop it. I excused myself to the kitchen, feeling the need for a task to distract from the charged silence in the living room. The air between us had grown heavier, laced with something unspoken and undeniable, and I could feel its pull. I told myself I was just being polite, making him a cup of tea to warm him up further, but my hands trembled slightly as I reached for the cupboard. As I stretched for a mug on the top shelf, the damp warmth of his presence filled the space behind me. I hadn't heard him come in, but I felt him now, close enough that I could sense his body heat. His voice was soft as he offered to help, but before I could answer, his hand grazed mine, steadying me as I nearly fumbled the cup. The touch sent a ripple through me, an electric jolt that traveled down my spine. I froze, still holding the cup, while his hand lingered just a moment longer than necessary. Then, he gently took it from me, placing it on the counter. His fingers brushed mine again, and this time, I didn't pull away. When I turned to face him, I realized how close we were, and the intimacy of the small kitchen seemed to draw us even closer. The light from the overhead fixture cast soft shadows across his face, highlighting the curve of his jaw and the faint dampness still clinging to his hair. His chest rose and fell with a measured slowness, but his eyes betrayed something deeper, an intensity that matched the wild flutter of my heart. I felt his hand on my waist, steady but tentative, as if he were testing the boundaries, waiting for me to push him away. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into him, drawn by the quiet magnetism between us. His touch firmed, his thumb brushing lightly against my side, and I was acutely aware of every point of contact between us, how his fingers pressed just enough to ground me, how his other hand came up to cup my arm, his palm warm against my skin. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name but didn't want to resist. My breath hitched as his other hand moved, skimming the curve of my hip and pulling me closer until I could feel the damp fabric of his borrowed hoodie brushing against me. His scent lingered in the space between us, rain, faintly metallic and clean, mixed with something distinctly him. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. I felt the rough pads of his fingers trace the small of my back, a touch so light it sent shivers cascading over my skin. When I tilted my head to look up at him, his face was already close, his breath warm against my cheek. He paused, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. My pulse thundered in my ears, my body hyper-aware of every sensation, the press of his hand, the faint tickle of his breath, the heat radiating from where our bodies nearly touched. And then, slowly, he closed the space between us, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that was both tentative and consuming, like a question waiting to be answered. My hands moved without thought, finding their way to his chest, fingers curling into the soft fabric of his hoodie as I pulled him closer. His response was immediate, his arms tightening around me, one hand sliding up to cradle the back of my head. His touch wasn't hurried but insistent, a quiet urgency that mirrored the unspoken ache I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for so long. I knew what was going to happen soon, and I was grateful to him for all that was going to happen. My loneliness that had been troubling me for a long time would end. He pushed me towards the counter. I realized that we were going to play this game roughly. I liked it better, so I could show him my gratitude. I pressed my nails on his arms to draw a thin line. He flinched. I guess he didn't think I would be like this. I slowly peeled off my package. He grabbed my waist and lifted me onto the counter. He also opened his own package and put it on top of mine. We both flinched at every friction wave. There was still moisture left from the rain on his skin. I leaned my neck to warm those cold areas. We were like two souls in one body. After about 10 minutes of this, I turned around to show him my gratitude better. This time, he placed his package on my watermelons. He was making sounds as he went back and forth quickly. This made me happy and a small smile turned on my face. I understood that he accepted my gratitude. A quiet voice said it's coming among those sounds. I went down from the counter to finish the finale. After waiting for a while, I realized it hadn't come and started helping. I had never seen the package up close before, so I didn't realize how big it was. I could only get half of it. Luckily, before I got tired, a powerful vibration came out. It was dripping down my face and onto the floor. We both got what we wanted. The problem was that I realized I hadn't even asked the name of the person I was grateful to. When I asked his name, he said, "What does it matter?" He was right, we got what we wanted. The kitchen melted away, the storm outside a distant hum. All that existed was the warmth of his body against mine, the quiet exploration of hands and lips, and the strange, beautiful sense of being completely seen and wanted for the first time in years. He got dressed and left the house with the dry clothes I had given him, saying, "Thank you for everything." That was all, but now there was an open door. I was going to order pizza when I was hungry.